Good evening, friends. Let me try that again. Good evening, friends.
Good evening.
Oh, now I'm awake. Thank you.
Good evening.
Welcome to the Saturday evening plenary program, which we've titled, what have we titled it? Belief, Practice, Action, the Challenges of Living in Community. I want to briefly introduce myself in the panel, and just lost what I was looking for. So give me a second. In 1995, a book was published called Quaker Cross Currents. How many of you are familiar with it? The History and Story of New York Yearly Meeting. And it closes with a concluding reflection by Victoria Baker Cooley, better known to us as Vicky Cooley. And in it, Vicky said, among other things, friends seem to have turned attention to questions of self-definition. Members challenge each other with demands about identity. Do all friends not believe the same things? Are friends not willing to trust each other? Can friends not be faithful to their Quaker heritage? Why are friends not all present and engaged for witness activities and for religious education? Are friends not open to continuing revelation of truth? Are friends not committed to the truth they have recognized and honored for generations? Vicky went on to tell a short story in response to the question, is the Society of Friends a community of belief or practice or action? One wise friend answered, yes. And that brings us to tonight. We are going to have first a short discussion of some of New York Yearly Meeting's history and its movements between quietism and activism and its schisms and coming back together, which Ben Frisch will provide for us online. Ben is a member of Brooklyn Meeting, and he began attending Quaker meetings at Summit Meeting with his mother as a child. I should say, my name is Fred Dettmer. I'm a member of Purchase Meeting. When I was 5, my parents moved to Harrison and began looking for Protestant churches. And when I was 8, they found Purchase Meeting. And I've been a member of Purchase Meeting since I was 11. That will be followed by some presentations from our panelists. First, Spee Braun will act as our moderator. Spee is a member of Old Chatham Meeting. She was born into a Quaker family and was not allowed to go to meeting when she was tiny and kept crying that she wanted to go with her older sister. So they finally took her when she was 4, and they discovered that was too young. Our first presenter will be Marvea Thompson. I've been asked to announce we are being recorded, which will be important to you all in the second half, as I outline the program, when you will be invited to share as well. Marvea Thompson's a member of Brooklyn Meeting, attending Westbury Meeting. She first became acquainted with the Society of Friends when she took her daughter to Friends School in Brooklyn Friends School, and discovered a meeting for worship that she walked in late and couldn't figure out what was going on, so she came back again and has continued coming back again. Beth Kelly will be our next speaker. She's a member of Brooklyn Meeting. Beth went to Earlham College unbeknownst to her what Quakerism was all about, and she found Quakerism there. She was a choir singer, and she thought Earlham was a good place for singing. Then John Scardina, who's a member of Purchase Meeting. John first became acquainted with Quakers when he got a job right here at Oakwood. And then we have Suzanne Blackburn, member of Genesee Valley Meeting. Suzanne was in the Peace Corps in Kenya, and no knowledge of Quakers. The only person I know who got into the Peace Corps without some familiarity with Quakerism. and was reading about religions and discovered Quakerism and first began attending meeting in Nairobi in Kenya. Then we have Mary Pagurelias. That's okay. My name is always mispronounced as well. So, and that's why we call her Mary Pags. And she's a member of Brooklyn Meeting. And as a student at Brooklyn College, she was struggling with a course and some of the language in a book. And her teacher, professor, was a member of Brooklyn Meeting and suggested she might find some answers there. And she's been going there ever since. Then we have finally Bryant Henning. Brian is a member, he's actually our first New York Yearly Meeting at-large member. And when asked how he came to Quakerism, Bryant will begrudgingly admit that he was going to meeting with his parents from his childhood, but will tell you that he first became a Quaker when he found New York Yearly Meeting. We're going to ask each of them to present for 4 or 5 minutes apiece on 2 queries. What does it mean to me, or to them, to be a friend? And how does that understanding affect your relationship with the wider world? After each of them has presented, Spee will lead them in a roundtable discussion, and then we will open it to the body and invite you all to share and to question and to provide commentary. And that's the program for this evening. So let us introduce Ben Frisch whenever you're ready, Ben.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good evening, friends. I'm sorry I can't be there in person with you all. Here's a reflection on our recent history as a yearly meeting. I'm focusing on the last half of the 20th century. And so this is from a vantage point of 25 years later. And I want to highlight 2 distinct phases, I think, that occurred in our history. And I've drawn upon a rereading of the last couple of chapters of the book that Fred mentioned, the Quaker Cross Currents, and I highly recommend it to all friends. And I also took a sampling of our yearly meeting minutes from the first yearly meeting I attended in 1964, and then for every 8 years following, just to get a feel of what was going on. Before 1955, there were 2 New York yearly meetings, as many friends know, the Hicksite and the Orthodox. The programmed meetings were in the Orthodox branch, but not all Orthodox meetings were programmed. The Hicksite branch was affiliated with Friends General Conference, FGC, and the Orthodox with 5 Years Meeting, later called Friends United Meeting, or FUM. Before joining together, friends from both branches worked together on committees and ventures, such as the Joint Peace and Service Committee. During the reunion, it was recognized that trying to come up with a unified book of discipline would be challenging. Friends from both branches realized that the book that was used by the Orthodox branch, which was the unified 5 years discipline, would be a stumbling block. So as a yearly meeting, we agreed to work slowly on rewriting Faith and Practice, and we divided into 2 different committees. One worked on the faith section and the other on the practice section. And that went on well through the 60s. I'd like to mention just 2 yearly meeting friends, though there were many active in this time period. These both attended 15th Street meeting, and they were Rachel Dubois and Bayard Rustin. Rachel worked on developing ways for people to communicate across racial and cultural differences. In the 1950s, she worked on the Quaker Dialogues Project, where she taught a method called group conversation. Bayard worked many years with A.J. Muste at the Fellowship of Reconciliation. He took part in efforts to integrate interstate busing in the 1940s, taught nonviolence methods. He had a big influence on Martin Luther King and was a driving force behind both the AFSC document Speak Truth to Power and, of course, as many know, the famous 1963 March on Washington. It is gratifying that he's been rediscovered by the rioter world in recent years after being obscured in part by homophobia. So the first phase after unification was a period of reaching outward. The late 1950s through the 60s was the high watermark for yearly meeting membership, at least since the Great Separation of the 1820s. And I'll just mention a few highlights of yearly meeting work that struck my interest as I was reading the minutes. The Committee on Nonviolent Action, the CNVA. This included friends such as A.J. Muste, Bayard Rustin, Albert Bigelow, Bill Huntington, along with Dorothy Day, David Dellinger, and other non-friends. These people were active in developing creative protests at nuclear test sites. They sailed the Golden Rule into the H-bomb testing site in Pacific. Individual acts of conscience, such as our Buffalo friend Newton Garver, protested the university loyalty oath, and he was backed in his stand by the yearly meeting. Dan Seeger brought his case for the right of conscientious objectors who do not believe in God to have the right for conscientious objection. Both cases were heard by and supported by the Supreme Court. Yearly meeting sent workers to rebuild Black churches in Mississippi after the summer of 1964. The Peace and Social Action Program, PSAP, was started as an outreach in 1966. It supported activities such as community response to police violence in Buffalo area. It started the CCRC, Children's Creative Response to Conflict, to teach nonviolence to children. Later, AVP, Alternatives to Violence Program, grew out of many of these earlier efforts. Friends will remember the work of friends Larry Apsey and Lee Stern. Annual peace institutes were held to nurture local peacemaking efforts and to share knowledge. Draft and military counseling was very active during the Vietnam War period and was done by many friends groups, including at the office at 15th Street. New York Yearly Meeting members were instrumental in starting Friends World College, which brought young scholars from around the world together to study in campuses located in different countries. And I should mention in 1972, the yearly meeting passed the Abortion Rights Minute. Now, upon publication of our Faith and Practice in 1974, friends will remember the Brown Book, perhaps. We quickly realized it needed to be updated to eliminate sexist and archaic language. Work began on the revision that only finally saw completion in the mid-1990s, and we're still working on it today, of course. The second phase of our history would include this period. As we work to better define what we believe about God, monthly meetings began to receive requests from same-gender couples to be married. Friends reopened our discernment about abortion rights. In my own family, we experienced my mother, Ruth Fansler, escorted women to clinics past protesters. And amongst the protesters at that clinic was her first cousin, Ellen Flanders, to give a sense of how the division worked in our yearly meeting. We had painful yearly meeting sessions during the decades in the 80s. and we lost many friends, particularly young friends. In fact, the yearly meeting lost a third of our membership between 1980 and 1996. Clintondale meeting withdrew for the yearly meeting in their protest of an exploration of Wiccan practices at a Pal House conference, and in fear of friends losing their centering on Christ. A memorable yearly meeting for me was in 1988 when Fran and Bill Tabor spoke to us. And they gave us the message about the need to stay at the table as we learn to better listen with love to those we disagreed with. Our faith and practice began to allow different meetings to discern on their own how we would support same-gender marriage. And we began to find unity. By the turn of the new century, we emerged smaller, yet in many ways less divided as a yearly meeting. Unfortunately, since then, we've lost another quarter of our membership. Currently, I believe we face an exciting challenge. What do we want to say to the world about that transforming power we experience in worship that urges us to heal the hurts in the world? Thank you, friends.
Thank you, Ben, for that brief history of only a small part of the New York yearly meeting history. It's gone on for many, many years. And I realized, I grew up in Philadelphia yearly meeting, and I didn't know this yearly meeting had such an august history. It was kind of hidden in Philadelphia. They didn't talk about those New Yorkers that way. So I'm really pleased to be reminded and to be here with you this evening as the moderator of this, what I would call an illustrious panel. Our panelists none of us are used to sitting up here at this table. So I think that might be partly why we were picked. And we have worked hard to prepare to really share from the heart with you briefly, but to the point. And each panelist will speak to, as Fred said, what does it mean to me to be a friend? And how does that understanding impact my relationship with the world, with the wider society, thinking about belief, practice, and action, and living together in one spiritual community, as Ben has been reminding us of its ups and downs. We are always in the yearly meeting challenged, but doing it, living in one and being in one spiritual community. So Marvea will start us off.
Okay, can you hear me now? Yes, Verizon. So, it's easy for me to write my thoughts down, but public speaking, not so easy. So I'll just speak from the heart. I made a few notes. So throughout my life, I've been guided and led to spiritual destinations as well as physical destinations. Like when I leave work and say, I'm going to go to Trader Joe's to get some eggs, and then magically my car just takes me to my driveway. It's okay because that's where I'm supposed to be. I never challenge the universe because I have found over the years that the universe just rearranges itself to bring to me what's needed for my life, what's needed in my life. I was led to my first meaningful worship, as Fred told you, in 1979, 1980, around then. I was about 10 minutes late. And on this particular first day, there was one message. A friend rose, went to the small lectern that was in the front. There was a Bible on it. He flipped through the pages, found his chapter, and he read. After that, there were no messages. You could really hear a pin drop. I was so upset. I thought I had come in at the tail end of the service. So I said to myself, go back next week, see what you missed. And of course, the rest is history. I found at Quaker meeting a place where I could hear and sometimes feel that of God in others. Being a friend allows me to be part of society that supports freedom of religion, along with others who are also seekers. I felt accepted unconditionally with all my past religious baggage. Messages would speak to my condition. Messages would answer questions that were heavy on my heart. Now, I could sit here and tell you that being a Quaker has been easy. But it has not been easy. It hasn't been an easy road to navigate. It was hard, but I was on a spiritual journey. I don't have to tell you this, but because those of you who've been here for the long haul know that there's a huge difference today in thoughts, ideologies, and perceptions between the 1980s and now in 2024. But I persisted on this journey. I traveled this road because, as I said, I was on my own spiritual journey for myself. And I found a home at Brooklyn Meeting. And that's probably why it's so hard for me to give my membership up, even though I attend Westbury. I made some lifelong friends, little f, at Brooklyn Meeting and here in the yearly meeting, because I worked mostly in the yearly meeting all my life. These friendships continue to nurture my spirit and the community that I've created for myself here. So how does this translate to being a friend in the wider world? Being a friend in the world is just an extension of who I am. I'm the same in both spheres. My spiritual life is reflected in my interactions in the world. I look for the good in everyone. And this didn't happen overnight. In my youth, I was a know-it-all. I gave out free advice, wanted and unwanted advice, all the time. But now, in this cycle of my life, I've learned to lovingly detach myself from things and some people as well. I've had an inward transformation, a transformation that allows me to listen more, to hear more, and to be less judgmental. As a friend, I embrace our diversity. I find that there's a divine essence that connects all of us, a divine spirit. And I'm open to accepting others just as they are. My spiritual journey is dynamic. It's ongoing. It's a culmination of all my past experiences and my new experiences. And that is so relevant to my life today. I allow my life to speak. I allow my inner life to shine, and I remain open to continued revelation. Oh, time is up.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marvea, for sharing tonight. Next, we'll hear from Beth.
Well, it'll just depend on Jen's.
Walk cheerfully
Walk cheerfully over the world, answering that of God in everyone, that of God in everyone. My goal as a Quaker has been to seek and answer that of God in everyone, and to keep attuned to music. I have experienced the surprise and the deep movement of spirit in corporate discernment, and it's kind of my favorite thing. How do we remain receptive to the messages that others bring and find a whole that makes sense that we can put into action? It's kind of like jazz. Now, I don't sing jazz very much, but it's kind of like jazz. I bring my own melody, but I'm also working to feel the beat and the tonal center that the group has in common. It's what I think we're doing in meeting. It's important for me to say that God or goodness is not the only thing that exists in every human heart. While I believe that each of us can connect to the divine spirit, I also know that each of us, myself included, has access to a spirit of evil, or at least a tolerance of evil. Quakers, like everyone else, experience greed, impulses to dishonesty or violence, a desire for predictability and control, because we're only human. The disciplines of answering that of God in myself and answering that of God in others are related. They don't ignore that evil exists, but offer attention and nurture to the good. In the jazz metaphor, it might be the combos sticking with the healthy groove they've established when the soloist goes a little bit off somewhere that just doesn't sound right. Or the group can embrace it and go off with them into the new musical idea. And the musical idea, sometimes we discover that it's better than the one that we started with. Other times, it's different than improv comedy. We don't have to always say yes and. In jazz and in spiritual community, sometimes we can coax folks back into harmony. And maybe like the bassist is the clerk here. On the other hand, as I said, we sometimes choose to follow a new and surprisingly beautiful idea that is more inspired than the groove that we're in. So how does that understanding impact my relationship with the world? Before I was a professional Quaker, I worked as a hospital chaplain. In that role, I came to embrace not only answering that of God in everyone, but an idea that God speaks to us in ways that we understand, which is my interpretation of what happens in the Pentecost story in the Bible. So I prioritize listening to how people understand their values, how they see God or basic goodness or the universe at work in the world and in them. I interpret these different ways of connecting to the divine, to the universe, as ways of understanding, as ways of experiencing the sacred in language and metaphor each individual understands and feels home in. Our experiences are culturally determined. And it has to be because we can only understand the sacred languages that we have encountered. In the hospital, I was consistently called upon to facilitate meetings of staff and families, and the jazz style of clerking is precisely why I was invited to do it. Socially, my Quaker-based relating feels pretty simple. Like Marvea, it's like, yeah, I am who I am, right? So what's important to my friends and my family? How is goodness emerging and contributing to the song of our lives? How do we play off of each other and support each other's big solos? How do we come back together when one or more has gone off into weird and painful keys? We seek the beat, we find our way.
So in 1978, I needed a job, and I showed up at Oakwood School, called Oakwood School then, not Oakwood Friends School. And that fall, I'm sitting in meeting for worship for the first time with students, and a student got up and gave ministry. And I was awestruck. I was just awestruck by the clarity of the message, the sense of integrity, and that wonderful adolescent energy that comes emerging with great passion. And immediately I thought, who are these people and why haven't I found them until now? Seriously. So it's been I spent the next 45 years working in Friends schools because that was clearly my calling for my work. Raised a Catholic, and I was one of those kids that really took it in very, very seriously. And altar boy, Boy Scout, Honorary Day Medal, and all those things. And I soon became disgruntled because I took a history of religion course and realized that I wasn't being told the whole story somehow. But I believe if at 20, someone had given me Thomas Merton, and you probably know who that is, and a man named Teilhard de Chardin, who wrote a book, his most famous book is called The Phenomenon of Man, and he talks about the evolution of consciousness. He got in a lot of trouble with the Jesuits. They didn't like him. He was too much of a free thinker. And now as a Quaker, I think back on that, he was talking about continuing revelation. That's really what he was talking about. He's buried up at the Culinary Institute, by the way. It's kind of interesting. That's where they stuck him at the end. They didn't quite know what to do with him. So now I have three versions of the divine that inform my life. One is what I share with all of you, that of God in every person. I was a religion major, and I could engage in conversation about immanence versus transcendence. Is it the inner light that comes through me from within, or is it transcendent light, the inward light that flows into me? But I don't need to go there. I'm happy to do it with you. I wrote papers about it at one point in my life. It's all about the light. And it's all about that sense of continuing to find that of the best in every person. I'm probably a pantheist. I get most of my meditative qualities out of being in nature. I'm a sailor and a bike rider and those sorts of things. And that's what helps me out. But I have two other versions of the divine. One I learned through AVP, Alternatives to Violence Project. And as soon as I was trained in AVP, Margaret Lechner dragged me down to El Salvador, and that started me on an entire other journey of my life in terms of understanding that there is something that allows us to transform the person we are inside with mantras like expect the best, seek a nonviolent solution, think before reacting. I'm Sicilian. That does not come naturally. Think before reacting. You know how that works. And I was able to do AVP in Hebron in Palestine after spending a lovely dinner with Walid's parents in Ramallah and his sisters. You weren't there that night, Walid, but anyway, and working with 24 Palestinian social workers in schools, struggling to find a way to incorporate the message of AVP into their work with children. Finally, the universe has a sense of humor because the first 12-step meeting I ever went to was at FGC in 1989. And here again, I thought, who are these people and why haven't I come here before? Talking about Ben and language and faith and practice, if you look at the 12 steps, this is long before neurolinguistic programming, two things stand out. First of all, the word I does not appear in the 12 steps. And second of all, the word no does not appear in the 12 steps. It is a plan for communal action moving forward. Sounds like Quakers to me. So those three avenues have informed my life. I've been working in Sing Sing with doing AVP for the last year and some months. And that's totally been a life transforming experience for me. My final piece is that When I read Robert Greenleaf's Servant Leadership, I was all about that. If you are a Hermann Hesse fan like I was, I must have read his author 10 times. If you read Journey to the East and you know about Leo, who on the Journey to the East appears to be the servant, but he's actually the wise person. So I've decided that my ministry, when I come to summer sessions, there are two things I do. I drive the golf cart and I sing songs after dinner. And I realize that each of us needs to find what works for us in speaking to that of God in one another.
All right. Good evening, friends. I came to Quakerism out of a desire for integrity. I was raised in a different faith tradition. And when I would pray every week, I'd be like, I don't even believe any of this. But, you know, I kept going to church with my family. I went to church all through college. And I thought, I got to find something else. Like, I can't do this anymore. I wanted to be part of a community that when I said, I am this religion, people would understand something about me and what my values were. And in the faith tradition where I grew up, that was not the case. So this is when I'm in college and I'm thinking about these things. I originally was an engineering major. I went to a science and engineering school, and I was there during the Reagan years, and I was going to work in aerospace, you know, and probably make weapons or something. And I woke up one day and I thought, I have to be a teacher. And then I realized I'd been teaching my whole life. And it was, you know, I understand now that that was my inward voice. That was the inward teacher telling me what, you know, where I needed to go. And it was really uncommon for people in my school to become public school teachers. Everybody, you know, went to work for General Dynamics, or they went and got their PhD in chemistry or whatever. So, but I didn't. I became a public school teacher. I majored in physics and started teaching. And a few years after that, I applied to be a Peace Corps volunteer. It was a fulfillment of a childhood dream. And as Fred said in the introduction, I went to Kenya, and I was in Nyeri district. I was not in the area of Kenya where there are a lot of Quakers. So when I was in Kenya, that was a time I took for myself to do a lot of research about different religions. I went to the embassy library and checked out all these books, and that's where I discovered Quakerism, was through that reading. And I figured out where the Quaker house was in Nairobi. I was not that close to Nairobi. It was a big trip to go there. And I wrote to them. I stayed overnight. I went to meeting for worship the next morning, and I just felt like I'd come home. It was a really rich experience. And I thought, I've found my people. And I've heard a lot of friends say that when they attend their first meeting, they just felt like they were home. And I look back on those experiences now as a friend and using the language of friends, and understand that in becoming a teacher or in joining the Peace Corps, those were acts of listening and faithfulness. So fast forward to now, probably most people in the yearly meeting think of me with prison ministry. That's something I'm very involved with at this time. The first time I went to a prison worship group was, I think it was 1997 or around that time. Farmington Scipio region, our entire region, was invited to go to George Fox Night at Attica Prison. And I decided to go because I could. I really knew nothing about prison ministry, like literally nothing. But I worked really close to Attica Prison. And so I thought, okay, I can go. So I'm going to go. And it just changed my life. And I started going regularly and continued going regularly for over 20 years until I got suspended. So, and any of you who do prison ministry, we can share stories about our suspensions for various reasons. So that was right before the pandemic, and then all the programs shut down anyway. And at that point, my husband started taking on some of that ministry because he was not a volunteer and he could communicate with people inside, which we were not allowed to do. And eventually, when my suspension was not resolved, I resigned from that. And now I do visitation and correspondence and do different forms of ministry, which I could talk about at length. I want to talk a little bit about Alternatives to Violence Project. I did a lot of AVP when I was a parent of young children, and my main focus was on like AVP in the family. And I did a lot of panels like this talking about that ministry. And I think what I really learned from that is that peace begins at home. And also really understanding my faith as like the power to be transformed. And other people have spoken about that here as well. And when it comes to teaching, I was recently asked, would you lead a connect call in our region about the ministry of teaching? And I was like, no. And I kind of shocked myself, like it came out so quickly. And so that's just something I'm paying attention to now. And I mean, my teaching is part of my spiritual life, and I'm just trying to pay attention now of, how I can really integrate that into my work that I do with kids. All right. My time is up.
Really? Oh boy, it's coming to you next. Good evening, friends. Good evening, friends. Can you all hear me? Okay, great. I love Quakerism, and I love Quaker pie. For me, Quaker pie is peace, integrity, and equality. Peace within myself for the gift of integrity that comes with speaking my truth and knowing that, yes, I am equal to you as you are equal to me. I no longer pretend. I no longer pretend to be a believer in a powerful creator, all-powerful creator. I no longer pretend to be a heterosexual woman. The result of no longer having to pretend is getting asked a question over and over. So, how does that work? And I reply, how does what work? Quaker and lesbian. Or, how does it work? How does what work? Being Quaker and non-theist. As most friends know, I am Quaker, and I'm married to my wife, Helen, who is also sitting right there. She is my wife. I am her wife. We reclaim the word wife because it is a beautiful word, and it has different meaning for us. I cannot answer that question of how does it work? And I don't know how that I could ever even ask anyone who they are works in the world of Quakerism. It is, though, at those times that I imagined something. I imagined Margaret and George and what their conversation would sound like about hearing me say this. They would say, thank gosh, the Quakers have really changed. So much of our diversity, and our need to pretend to be other than our full, true selves. Margaret would then sigh and say to George, why haven't they figured it out yet? We don't need to understand. We don't need to judge. Ours is only to love and embrace this friend and all friends who have the courage to present their full, true selves. Yes, my beloved, replies George to Margaret. The way to deepen our life as friends is to be careful of like-mindedness conformity and of deception or lying by trying to present oneself as other than one truly is. Margaret sighs again, turns to George. And George, what about minding the power? Have they all forgotten that most important piece of this? To mind the power is to know that which is eternal, that which is infinite. What this means to me and to many, many other non-theists, also called atheists and other terms, love is that which is eternal. Love is that which is eternal. To know love fully will keep us in unity. Only love can do that. Only love. And friends, love for me is not another word in place of. It is a word that is power, eternal, and powerful. So in addition to my full true self, being a lesbian and non-theist, as I am a mother, a grandmother, a great-grandmother. I love purple hair. I have lots of tattoos. I was a juvenile delinquent. I kicked a policeman. I drank moonshine when I was 18 in the hills in Tennessee. I was an unwed mother. Thus, I was also an unfit mother. I do practice random acts of kindness. I have been mothered by many wonderful women in my life, and I devote myself to women who have lived in the same darkness that I have. Thank you, friends.
So when I was born, my parents were members of Rockland Friends meeting. And I grew up attending that meeting with predominantly my mom and my older sister. I took my first steps at a monthly meeting retreat up at Powell House. As a teenager, I largely stopped attending because I was the only youth my age, and I wasn't very engaged. And so I relied on the yearly meeting for my Quaker experiences. From the ages of 13 to 18, I attended 53 youth conferences at Powell House, as well as more adult and family conferences and summer sessions every year. I stayed active in the yearly meeting as I got older, all through being a young adult, serving on many committees. But it wasn't until I was in my 30s that I finally became a member of the yearly meeting, when an at-large membership became possible. When the question of what does it mean to be a friend was brought to me, my first thought was, what is a Quaker? That's always the question that I get asked when I'm out in the world. And while some of you may have developed clear and concise answers, I have not. When I explain it, I separate the question into 3 parts: inward beliefs, outward expression, and ethical bureaucracy. People want to know what Quakers believe. Are we Christian? Are we Jewish? Are we non-theist? Are we atheist? Are we Buddhist? Are we pagan? Or something else entirely? My answer is yes. They get confused. And so I try to explain how we aren't told what to believe. And when we sit in silence, everyone chooses what feels right for them. We are indistinguishable in those beliefs when we are gathered in silence. And so while we may use different words, God, spirit, light, we are still all connected in that silence. So when we ask, what is it that all Quakers believe in? I turn to the testimonies, the Quaker testimonies, because that is what we take and carry out into the world. We often refer to it as spices: simplicity, peace, integrity, community, equality, stewardship. These are the things that we take out of the silence and share. And when we talk about doing this, we often refer to it as living into our faith. And when I'm explaining this, this is the point that I start questioning, how did we get to this conversation? How did this person know to ask me what's a Quaker? Because I assume that most non-Quakers don't walk around asking each other that. And so they must have asked me for a reason. There must have been something that I was doing, saying, behaving, that triggered it, that made them go, wait, why are you doing this? And it can be anything, and it often is. When I talk to someone for any length of time about any topic, it almost always ends up talking about Quakerism. We're talking about money, where I work, how do I choose to spend my money, where do I shop, how do I invest things, what's going on with taxes. All of that can be connected back. If it's a social topic, marriage, pronouns, and gender, one of the many inequalities we witness on a daily basis, all relates back. Possible politically, domestic and international violence, healthcare accessibility, human rights, public education, even the question of how's the weather is connected to faithful stewardship of the earth. How does being a friend impact what I do in the world? How does it not?
Thank you all for sharing from your personal experience, your journeys, and your insights. I'm wondering, Brian, would you mind answering this question about how many of your neighbors, friends, and colleagues know that you're Quaker?
I would say all of them. When I meet someone new and I start talking, and it inevitably gets to Quakerism, and I start talking about, oh yeah, this person or that person in my life. Anytime I actually specify when it's not related to Quaker, because it's easier that way.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I'm wondering if others, Mary Pegs or Suzanne, if you would want to just let us know, like, how many of your friends and neighbors and folks around you know that you're Quaker, and you were talking about presenting your true self, your full self in the world. And then I'll ask if any of you three want to share.
Okay. Most of my friends are Quakers, so I think they know that I am a Quaker. I have a personal trainer. I do weightlifting now these days, and other things. And anyway, so my trainer is a Sicilian woman, a young Sicilian woman, and she's in her late 30s. Anyway, she's a mom and she's a wife, and she's looking to have another child. They're going to have another child. And I haven't shared this with my wife yet, but wait, Helen. So she asked me that when she's pregnant with the child that she and John Carl hope to have, if I would be the not godmother of her child. Now she's an Italian Catholic, Sicilian, Sicilian Italian Catholic.
Mary Pags.
I would say most people that I know, like my colleagues and people in my community, probably know that I'm Quaker. And the peace organization that I work with, Community Peace Group, they definitely know I'm a Quaker. I don't talk about it with my students. It doesn't really seem appropriate with 8th graders in a science class to be bringing it up a lot. But but sometimes I'll, say things like, back in the day when I went to prison, they'd be like, "Oh, what are you doing this weekend?" "Oh, going to prison," or, and then I'd be like, "What?" So have a little fun with it there.
Oh, yeah. It usually begins with them assuming that I'm a hippie, and it goes on from there. And I enjoy that convergence of the amazing idealism I had in that time period. We were going to change the system, as it were. And but I think the prison piece has been the most revelatory now, because people do ask me, "Oh, I'm going to Sing Sing this weekend," and they, and inevitably, the curious thing about it is, for lots of people, the next question is that safe? And I tell them, I feel safer with the incarcerated men who would probably do anything to protect me in any eventuality than I do with the COs, correctional officers. So just that whole sense of, and that generally leads to a wider conversation about the choices that I make with my life. Not always necessarily about Quaker per se, but just trying to do the next right thing in a world and make a difference where it's pretty difficult to figure out what to do.
Hi. So I would say that socially, I'm very open about it. When I was working as a hospital chaplain, it was if people asked me, I would answer honestly, but I was trying to come into the room as a sort of spiritual blank slate. What do you believe? What are the things that are important to you? So if they asked, I would say Quaker, and then it would be, "Well, I thought that you didn't exist anymore. Oatmeal, yada, yada, yada." Oatmeal, yeah. Or like, they let you wear that, and I was like, I was dressed professionally, like a step up from this, but I wasn't like just Amish. Yeah. So, but I think that now, I don't know all my neighbors. Like, I live in a pretty busy neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York. So, the neighbors who know anything about me know that I'm Quaker, but most of my neighbors don't know me. And one of the funny things is that I am very out as a Quaker in the Stonewall Corral, because the Stonewall Corral is one of the places that I feel like I can wear my Baltimore Yearly Meeting t-shirt that like has the Quaker Oats guy in like transgender colors. I don't know if any of you have seen this, but it says worship in silence, love out loud, I think is what it says. So it's a great t-shirt, and I've worn it to choir a couple of times. And so they're like, tell us about Quakers, Beth.
So, two of my neighbors know. One, am I on? One is my best friend, and has a really stressful job as a CNO of a hospital. So he's always calling me. And so when I don't answer and I finally get back to him, he said, "You were staring at each other, weren't you?" And then at work, I have about, I'd say maybe 6 major employees. I have others, but the ones that we're really close, they always have these meetings like once a year, New Year's. When we come back from New Year's, we always meet and pray. So I always make them speak out of the silence. Okay. And then the guy that I brought my practice from, he's maybe 72. He always says to me, "Marvea, I never hear you raise your voice. You never yell at me." And I say to myself, "Jeff, I always yell at you, but this is how I do it." Because he's always screwing up the lenses when he makes the glasses. He screws up the lens and he runs, gets another one, and it's the wrong one. So if I check the glasses, one is transition, one is clear. So I'm like, "Jeff." That's how I yell at him.
Thank you, friends. Talking about our belief, practice, and action in the world. I'm wondering if, based on what we've been hearing from one another here on the panel, if you have anything you've heard that surprised you from fellow panelists, anything that's rubbed you the wrong way, or that has really resonated with you the other way. Is there anything someone said that made you want to share another story? That we're storytelling, and I think that's a really important way to share about our journey together in spiritual community.
I didn't know that Mary Pags went to Brooklyn College. So did I. I think I left there before you did.
It's black and the hair.
Yeah.
So one of the things that Taylor Desjardins said is, we're not physical beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a physical experience. And thinking about the dialogue between George and Margaret, there we go. And, the part that is not in George Fox's journal extensively is the faith healer part of this. And so he was very involved in this idea of the spiritual and the physical interchange there. And I think it's very appropriate. It reminds me, when I'm having a bad day, I have a certain amount of sobriety in my life from other things. My emotional sobriety, I think I'm on about day 4 at the moment, since my last relapse. So when I think about that, I have to center myself back in that spiritual realm in terms of the way that works. And so you had me thinking about that with George and Margaret.
Can I ask a question? Bryant, could you say more about ethical bureaucracy?
I think everyone has that question.
So when I split it into the 3 parts, the inward beliefs, the outward expression, and the ethical bureaucracy, the question was, what is a friend? What being a friend in the world? And the inward beliefs, since they're inward, you don't see them. And the ethical bureaucracy, while that is the business meeting part. That is the system of committees that we have. we it is spirit led. It comes from the inner beliefs and outward expression. Because of that, that is why we do business the way we do business, not the other way around. And you can be a Quaker, you can be a friend without participating in business meeting. I think there's a lot of Quakers, there's a lot of friends who just walk around the world being friends.
Thank you. You ready for another question? All right. I'm wondering if anybody would be willing to share a time. We're getting into more of the challenges of being in one spiritual community. We've talked about people shared how they felt they landed in a home or a place here in the Religious Society of Friends, but also it takes some persistent stick-to-itiveness, right? And faith to stay engaged and with our community. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share a time when things that have been come up and your individual perspective didn't necessarily jive with the community. Maybe you spoke up, maybe you didn't, and just any challenge you faced with that. I'll give you a minute to think about it. Would you be willing to share a time when you might have spoken up related to, yes, Mary Peggs is ready.
I got a lot of stories. I mean, that's what happens when you become 74. You got a lot of stories. In 2009, I was asked to speak at Silver Bay. It was about whether we stay at the table or not with FUM. And I probably would still say today, no, we do not stay at the table, because sometimes we have to walk away and let things work out the way they're going to work out. And I shared my stories pretty much as I shared now, except there are new things that happened since 2009. And one of my pieces that I shared was that I lived in Greece. I married a Greek, and the time that I was pretending to be heterosexual all those years ago. And when I could no longer keep my feelings hidden, I lost two of my children. I had to leave them behind because they were Greek citizens, and I could only take my oldest daughter, who was my illegitimate child, because I had her out of wedlock in a home for unwed mothers, and so she was the only one I could bring back to the States. I shared that story, and there are a lot of lesbians around, a lot of gay men around that you don't even know about, lots of non-theists. You would be surprised how many there are throughout the world, Quakers. And one lesbian came to me and said, Mary, be careful. I said, what do you mean be careful? There are really, and I'm sorry I'm going to say this, I cannot, put sugar on this. There is a friend who has been talking trash about you in the restroom, in the bathroom over there. Just be careful. I don't know how I managed to stay in Quakerism after that. I was by a good Quaker woman. I was.
After spending 23 years in Philadelphia yearly meeting, very active there, and doing a lot of work with the youth program there. I moved back to New York. I had remarried and moved back to New York, and I was asked to be a Quaker in residence at a friend's school that was struggling to find its identity. And I soon realized that I was perhaps there was a checklist, and I was one of the checks on the checklist. Do we have a Quaker in residence? Check, kind of thing. My wife would relate that it was this kind of I would come home and I'd say, that's it. I can't do this anymore. What's happening. And then I'd have a parent come up to me and say, Teacher John, this Quakerism we're coming up at the dinner table and we're talking about things differently at home and whatever. So I stuck with it. But what the curious thing that happened is when George Floyd was murdered, we had an online meeting for worship, and I was asked to sort of facilitate it with in terms of timing and things. And I asked for 8 minutes and 46 seconds of silence. After that day, my email was removed from the school email. I was unable to contact a lot of people that I thought I perhaps could contact. Remember, it was the pandemic now. Of course, it was 2020. And it was really challenging, but I realized that I kept being told, you're still doing good work. And I'm thinking about, Eden last night talks about the belly of the beast. I really felt like I was in the belly of the beast, on Long Island, no less, where I can still say Long Island and coffee and all those things, and I thought, do I stick this out? And I'm glad I did, but it really challenged my faith in terms of when we have to go out and work with others that clearly are not embracing in a deep way what we're trying to do.
So I want to take this in a little bit of a different direction. I'm thinking about a time, gosh, I don't remember if it was 1 year ago or two, when I was in my monthly meeting for worship with the Concern for Business. And I offered what I thought was like well-grounded, thoughtful, I thought it was spirit-led ministry. And it was more grounded in righteousness and self-righteousness than it was in what our meeting needed. And it brought another member of our meeting to tears. And I want to say that I can screw up. I could screw up during meeting for business. I could be screwing up now, who knows, right? But that when I talk about like there being like a seed of something not great in me too, like it's because I've seen it in action, and I've seen it in action among friends. And I think that it's important for me, but friends generally, to honor that we're not always right. That sometimes when we think we're saying something that in the moment feels really right, it could be really wrong.
At this time, I'm thinking we'll open it up to everyone else. What we're looking for is, well, we will accept questions up here on the panel, but we also are interested in your stories and your ministry on these questions about our belief, or is it belief or practice or action? Yes. And the challenges of taking our faith into the world and of being together, living together in our spiritual community. So we invite friends to share at this time. Raise your hand, please, your digital hand if you're a Zoomie, your physical hand if you're a roomie, and wait to be called on.
I wanted to briefly comment.
Could you start with your name and meeting, please, Carol?
Of
Thank you.
course, I'm Carol Baggerly, and I am at the La Jolla Friends meeting in San Diego, or La Jolla, I guess is really more precise. We've been here for almost 30 years. The thing that I was impressed by in terms of the totality of your comments and stuff was how many times the word AVP has come up. I was so beautifully overwhelmed and encouraged by that when both my husband and I participated in it many, many, many years ago, and in working in prisons and businesses and in different areas of our lives. It is so meaningful to learn those specific tools to enable us to speak clearly or more effectively, I think, to accomplish our goals. Just so many ways. And my question really back to you is, it would seem to be that if the alls of Quakers put together a massive program to say, let's do things with AVP throughout the world. Let's figure out a kind of course that doesn't take as long, or target businesses or target dentist offices, or I don't know. It's just like there's just so many ways to use those tools, resolving all kinds of conflicts. I'm just very much in favor of that. So I just wondered if there'd been any ongoing discussion about that.
Helen?
So I thought you might want to hear the other half.
Your name and meeting?
Helen Mullen, Brooklyn meeting, spouse and wife to Mary Pags. You going to time me? No, we met 25 years ago in 1999. And for the whole year that we were dating, in December, I moved into her apartment. And she kept saying to me, you know, I just want to take you to Quaker meeting. I think you just love going to Quaker meeting. You just love going to Quaker meeting. Now, so first day, first month, 2000, we went to Quaker meeting and it was home. And we have stayed. She would pick me up when I served on ministry and council at 10 o'clock at night so that I didn't have to ride the train home. And if she ever gets asked, I'd do the same.
May I respond to that quickly? Just to go back to my stories about juvenile delinquent, we have like a really traditional story, juvenile delinquent, ex-nun.
Said she was a former nun, I think is right. Mhm. I'm
You
gonna
have a
have
hand
John,
up. You
hang
have a
on,
hand
hang,
up.
hang on a second.
I just want to respond about AVP. And one of the things that's happening now, we have an AVP New York City group working, and we're trying to do a lot of mini workshops. And I think that we're trying to find vehicles for getting AVP to be more widespread. Also, there's an organization called YADI, Youth Alternatives to Incarceration, that is working now. We're hoping to have our first full implementation of that in White Plains soon. So thank you for the comment about getting the word out about AVP in a variety of ways.
Thanks, John.
You have a hand up.
I know, I can see one at a time here. The next hand up, calling on is Carol Summer. Your name and meeting?
I'm Carol Summer. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
I am often putting it off to a challenge, so I always check. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I was listening to Carol Badgerly's vision about the possibility of at once, immediately, urgently finding ways to take AVP everywhere. This struck an opening in my spiritual self. And I want to say, tuck this idea up your sleeve, friends, sleep on it, and let's come back to it. Don't let this idea slip away.
Anthony?
Good evening, friends. My name is Anthony Salem, a member of Rochester Friends Meeting. I just want to thank the panel because everything I heard from them resonated with me. And if I were able to speak so eloquently, most of those answers would have been mine as far as coming to Quakerism and continuing on this path. What I do want to share, though, for myself are two additional things. I'm an ex-felon. I spent 33 years in prison, and my Quaker journey began at Attica Correctional Facility in 1989 with two people that may be familiar to this group, Vicky Cooley and Judy Haley. When I walked into the meeting, the first thing that both of those women displayed to me was trust and a willingness not to judge. The trust part was working both ways. I was amazed that these two women would actually come into prison with all us, convicted felons and sit in a room alone with us. That just kind of blew my mind. But the trust started going both ways. And it's a place where I felt safe and able to be myself and also not be judged. It was one of the first places that I ever was at that I was actually not judged for what I was judged for who I am, not what I did.
Jillian?
Jillian Smith, my member. Yes, okay. My membership's at Saratoga. I liked what you said about the big book, or the 12-step program. And I'm also gonna like sort of challenge a little bit of the something, well, not challenge, but wrestle with the fact that you said you felt safer in the room with folks that were incarcerated than with the COs. I wrestle with that duality a lot because my Quaker ancestry is from a very abusive CO. And that's so complicated. And it was my dad who went to Powell House and who and his mother, my grandmother, who was clerk of the Adirondack Friends meeting back in the day. Such a weird story. But yeah, I wonder if I too would agree with that. But something that I just heard from Liz Gilbert, who's a modern novelist, about Bill W. and the big book was that something that the original 100 people did. This is a shameless plug for my podcast that I'm super obsessed with, which is We Can Do Hard Things, is that the original 100 people who got sober, they wrote to the divine every day by themselves. And Liz Gilbert has rekindled this practice in a large group right now, where people are writing to love. So they've also redefined the divine itself, and they've almost made it non-theist. So there's this huge movement right now for people writing letters to love. I think it's on Substack somewhere. And if you look up Liz Gilbert, you can find it. But it's just really interesting that like that Bill W. in the big book had this really mystical, non-mediated connection to the divine, where each person got to develop their own relationship with just listening to the divine come through them, and letting the divine write them a letter with their own hand, kind of a thing. And I just think that it's a practice that might be really cool for each of us going forward. Yeah.
We have a friend over here.
I'll just go by William. I'm sort of in what Dante might call limbo or purgatory as far as Quakers go. And I'd like to touch up this panel. I'd like to have a response from the panel. And that is, this is how friends came, or individuals came to know friends. And in many respects, that's a warm, fuzzy story. It's very comforting. But I'd like to touch upon something that Ben said about Friends, New York Yearly Meeting. The 30% of friends that we lost. The 20% of friends that were lost. Friends have clearness committees. Friends leave meetings. What kind of outreach to those friends do meetings have? Do they have clearness committees about why someone left that meeting or the Society of Friends? But more importantly, what do friends do about lapsed, or as one Quaker punster put it, recovering Quakers? Those who might think about returning to the Society of Friends. What faith and process is there for those individuals? That is a question that has not been addressed and needs to be, for the health and safety and future of Friends, particularly in attracting the young.
Thank you. That may be a question for the body, but I will offer the panelists, if you have experience with that you'd like to share, you could speak, or we have a couple other hands up. Suzanne?
Something about that. Not sure exactly where this is going. My experience in Quaker community is that we have a set of practices like we talked about today in our Quaker continuing education about addressing the clerk and why we do that. And a lot of the reason why we do that is to keep us safe in a certain way. And when that doesn't happen, when we're hurt in meeting in any facet of our Quaker community, I think it's especially painful because we expect better of our community. We think this is a loving place and this is where we're going to be safe and not judged and welcomed. And then when that doesn't happen, it's extremely painful. And I can think of times in my life and in my relationship with my community where friends left, you know, and when we would reach out to them and they would say, well, my spiritual needs weren't being met. And then we're left scratching our heads like, well, you know, why didn't you tell us what they were? But then maybe we didn't ask. So, and I think sometimes when people are new to community, there's like an in group and an out group, and people don't know how to get in. Like how do you get to be one of those friends who kind of knows what's going on all the time and is making the decisions? And maybe we're not always great about communicating with newcomers or welcoming them in. I mean, I think it's something each meeting would need to address really individually because we all have sort of different flavors and cultures in our different groups. I'm trying to think, there was another story that came to mind. Well, there was a time in my own meeting where I felt really like I was being taken for granted. And I think this is really common for like moms and caregivers. You get into the meeting and you sort of become like the mom of the meeting, and you realize like you're serving everybody, but you're starving. But I told my meeting that. It wasn't pleasant, but I said it. And I pretty much said, like, if people don't step up, like, I'm not going to come anymore. Like, I'm going to stop doing the things because it's too much. And then people stepped up. So, we have to have those uncomfortable conversations sometimes, and people have to know that they can bring those things up with their meeting. I felt like I could in my meeting say those things.
I'm going to turn next to Polly.
Hi, Polly Duke, Westbury Monthly Meeting, and a teacher at a Quaker school. One of the things that I've been noticing over the last 24 years of teaching, this is a school that goes from early childhood all the way through 12th grade, has been that within the meeting and meeting for worship, the high schoolers in particular are increasingly reticent to participate in any form of vocal ministry. And I was thinking about what Anthony was saying about judging and how he felt that he was not judged on his previous actions, but just as who he was as a human being. And I think that in this world today, with social media and the teenagers who are so attached to their phones and almost addicted to a kind of external affirmation of likes or not likes on social media, it's not only difficult for them to move away from the fear of being badly judged, but it's difficult for them to be fully present. Jonathan Haidt just came out with a book about the close relationship between the epidemic in depression and anxiety among teenagers happening at the same time that smartphones and particularly access to social media became ubiquitous. And I really see, very sadly, in terms of the growth of Quakerism among our youth, that just as a lot of families have become increasingly cynical about any form of institutionalized religion, one of the things that's difficult to do as a Quaker, and a Quaker at a school that's in a very wealthy area where there's a lot of focus on getting into a prestigious school and accessing eventually a profession that will be, you know, a very high salaried, yield a high salaried position. One of the things that's so sort of sad for me to see is that along with a cynicism about institutionalized religion, there's been a more global rejection or lack of understanding about the protective, beneficial nature of spirituality. I mean, one of the most important professors that I had at Columbia is a woman named Lisa Miller, who's done a lot of study about how those adolescents who are more spiritually developed, who have a developed spirituality, have a 70 to 80% less likelihood of developing depression or any kind of substance abuse. And so, you know, it's really tough in a world where kids and families are so focused on achievement and on extrinsic kind of awards and performance and getting into a prestigious school, to lift up that of God in everyone and the beneficial nature of spirituality and how powerful and real ministry can be and vocal ministry could be if we had sort of the moral courage to really engage. So I just wanted to lift up that that's the work I'm doing as a Quaker, to try to explain to the kids how vital ministry can be and how important meaningful worship can be if we make it just as important as the SATs, in fact, more important.
Bryant's up.
Bryant. Community is one of the important spices for me. And one of the things I like to do is have friends over for game nights. And because most of my friends are also capital F friends, it's almost always all Quakers or people who were Quakers. And I say were Quakers because very few of them attend meetings, go to business, anything of that. But when we're there and we're talking and we're chatting, and we're playing games, we'll talk about things and it'll come up of, oh yeah, I'm doing my taxes, and how do you all do your war tax protest? And is there a good way? And we're talking about that because it comes from being friends. And there's a card game. It's a Quaker card game from, I believe it's UK yearly meeting called Unable, Unwilling. And it's a game about avoiding being nominating to committees. And we don't play it that often. But when we do, half of it is a game, and half of it ends up being processing trauma. We often use it to process the trauma as young adults of being asked to serve on committees, or when you do serve on committees and your experiences of that, and your experiences as being a friend in the ethical bureaucracy part. Because it is painful as a young adult. It is often painful to keep coming and feel like you are not heard. Earlier today, during business meeting, every member, every person who is here, who is under 40, gave a message, pleaded. And when we left, and we talked, because we talk. Just because we are not here in meeting doesn't mean that we don't talk. We were in unity of feeling unheard. And so then when we're also asked why we don't show up, it's because we feel unheard. And when people leave the meeting, it's because they feel unheard.
Waleed? Name and
Waleed Masarsa, Friendship Friends monthly meeting in North Carolina yearly meeting. So not really quite a New York yearly meeting person, but I think that sorry, Brian, right? Okay, I just wanted to make sure. I'm terrible with names. I think what Ryan just said really resonates with me, because as someone who's under 40 and has been in Quaker spaces since as far back as I can remember, I also often feel unheard, and I feel like it's a common experience among young Quakers. On the one hand, on the other hand, as a person of color, as a person who comes from a minority background in the United States, I also feel double unheard. And the combination of both feels like this is how sometimes we bring our personal, not our inner light, but rather our human light, not light maybe, or and I feel like people are not realizing how Quaker process, when it's not spirit-based, can be very violent and can be a practice of violence. And how, because as Quakers, we're very good at analyzing violence in the world at large, especially within systems and interactions. We are not very good at analyzing intercommunal violence and how words can be violent, and not hearing people is a practice of violence. Certainly it is not, the same kind of violence as an unfolding genocide or a police brutality, because we are conditioned, we're in a society that we're constantly surrounded with physical and structural and systemic violence, that it's very hard to go from that and then to detect intercommunal violence through things like not hearing or microaggressions and things like that. we're not trained or we're not very astute at detecting it. And I mean, some of the ways that we can think, I mean, as Quakers, we're some of the legacies that we are very proud of is the fact that we were among the first churches, so to speak, in the United States to abolish slavery, right? But the process of getting into unity to abolish slavery took a very long time. And in that period of time that took so long, we were entrenched in practicing violence because many Quakers owned slaves and contributed to the slave economy and so on and so forth. And so when folks are, I think that one of the, I'm not sure what I'm saying here other than like, how do we recognize when we are speaking, if we are actually weaponizing Quaker process, if we are actually speaking from our own personal biases and not from our inner light, and how do we question ourselves and our microaggressions and our socializations, whether it's just a personal dynamic that has nothing to do with broader identity politics or actually things that are rooted in those issues. Are we practicing, are we just doing what the dominant society has instructed us or socialized us to believe or do? That's kind of, I think, what I'm putting out here. But yeah, not really a question, just a reflection. Thank you. I don't know if folks noticed, but I fell asleep earlier. That's how tired I am.
Brian. I'm
Your
bad
name,
with
your
names
name,
too.
please.
Sorry, Rochelle from Hudson Friends. How can we make you feel less unheard? Or how can we help you feel heard? That's more positive.
I want to offer the possibility that you don't have to respond to that question at this time, but if you'd like to, we will offer you that opportunity.
Could I listen in on that conversation?
Wait. Oh. Marvea.
So for somebody who went through it already, I'm a little past 30 or 40. But when I was in my 30s and my 40s, I felt like I lived on the fringes of Quakerdom. I mean, I was here, I was around. I was friends with like the Palmers and Daisy Westra, and they would like drag me along to different meetings and say, come. You know, I also had kids, which was hard for me to move around, but when I could, I would take them with me to FGC, and they would just take me to different meetings in different places to try to get me involved. I still kind of stayed on the fringes, but I'm still here.
There are two friends on Zoom who would like to speak.
I'd like to see some hands. Maybe I wasn't seeing the hands on Zoom. And just to note, we just have a short time left. But we definitely want to hear from our two friends. Mary
Pugh Clark from, can you hear me?
Yes.
Mary Pugh Clark from Montclair Meeting. I think the two young men who spoke about not being heard said something about how and then there's a thing like who's the we that's like trying to ask them how to be heard better. That's offensive and sort of talking down. I haven't got the right words. It's interesting. I think there is a history of Quaker process being weaponized, as was said, and silencing people by not having the curiosity to find out about their stories. It's been really illuminating and hopeful to me to learn something about each of the people on the panel and hear their story. As a historian, I would have liked to have known the year that each of the people on the panel was born, because it could have helped me put into context where they came and what brought them to Quakerism. And the final thing I'll say is I am disappointed that there was not more addressed by the panelists about the big issues of justice in terms of economics, race, patriarchy, all of that, even though I appreciate the sincerity and warmth of the personal stories. And as I said, really have a warm feeling listening. But I carry those concerns because in my own story, at the time when there was all the commotion about goddess worship, I left the yearly meeting for a good 10 years because I felt pushed out and misunderstood and not heard.
That was a good year.
Is there one more person, one more Zoomie who would like to speak whose hand's not up? Carol?
Thank you. I am speaking again because I think that I have worked with AVP type projects in businesses, in schools, major projects in medical, like a doctor's office who had about 25 employees. And she so totally believed in the AVP process. She says, "What can you do with my staff?" And I said, "I don't know, but I'll find out." And as the years went on and things, by the way, age-wise, I'll be 82 soon, so I'm a little over 40. The thing that came up loud and clear on day one of the first kind of meeting I had with the subgroup of the medical doctors, I asked them what were their problems that they were trying to address in their profession. And one of them came up, "Well, I'd really like to be able to deal with this particular mother's not giving her child the medicines that are required. How do I do that?" That was one. Another case in a business setting was everything that they wanted to talk about was how to get the next step forward with some particular project that they were working on, and they didn't know how to do it. So they were really looking at methods for achieving their business, medical, other goals that would allow them to move forward. And the way I chose to look at it was if you can help somebody move forward with what they see as their number one objective, you got to ask, first of all, what it is. But if you can then show them, back again to the AVP, particular techniques for talking with people and having them do exercises, so forth and so on, it works. It really worked. And not all the time. There were some projects it just did not work. But majority of the time it did. So again, I would still encourage us to look ahead, and if there gets to be some kind of subcommittee or something, I would be delighted to work with it. But it's really on the spirituality, to me, comes as a result of achieving something that works for you and feels good and was positively done. I mean, there it is. So
Thank you.
thank you very much for having these sessions today. I very much appreciated the learning that I have gotten from listening to you.
We're in the wrap up phase here. We have one more roomie we're going to call on, and then we'll move to our closing worship. Anne in the back.
Ann Pomeroy, New Paltz Monthly Meeting. We were actually asked an interesting question, which is, how do we listen to the voices that we don't listen to? And that question doesn't belong to the panel. That question is Margaret Fell's quote to us of, "Let the light rip you open and show you the way that the light is speaking to you." And so this is our spiritual piece here of how do we listen to the Spirit guiding us to see the things that we cannot see, to look beyond the ways that we have been taught to see, and to pull away those veils. This is a deep, deep spiritual question. And I'm so grateful that the question was asked. So grateful. And I'm so grateful that the panel did not answer it. And so I hope, I pray that people leave here asking, what is it that is next for me to see? Not 5 miles down the road, but what's the next step? Or as David White says, take the next step, the step close in. We are each asked to take a step. We are take that step guided by the light. And we need to take those steps to hear and to see and to feel. How do we not see the person who's in front of us? To see perhaps ourselves, how we're not listening to ourselves. And so that's all our spiritual work.
And so I want to thank our panelists for sharing that question of what does it mean to you to be a friend, and your understanding of that and your relationship out in the world. It's been very rich, very special. And for others offering the question, we did find there are challenges in being together in spiritual community, which we expected to find. We've been finding all day, and we've also heard a lot about faithfulness and some great questions to head us out the door. But first, let's just have a few minutes of closing worship together. Go in peace, friends.
Thank you all.